Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today we're diving into the corners of the wizarding world where logic seems to have gone on vacation. While magic is often ruled by powerful spells, it's the potions that sometimes bring the most surprising effects. But not all potions are created equal. Some raise a single question. Why do they even exist? Let's find out. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Gregory's unctuous unction. Let's begin with a potion that could double as a backstage political tool. Unctuous unction, invented by one Gregory the Smarmy, works simply. Give it to a stranger and they'll instantly consider you their best friend. Sounds convenient, but in a world with the imperious curse, which bends one's will, and love potions that trigger obsession, unctuous unction feels like a clumsy attempt to squeeze onto an already overcrowded shelf. What's worse, it only works on strangers, so if you've had a falling out with a coworker, tough luck. Number 2. The pumpkin potion. Now we shift to the world of video games. In Lego Harry Potter, years 1-4, players are tasked with brewing a pumpkin potion for Snape. Its effect? Pure silliness, it turns your head into a pumpkin, maybe useful for a Halloween party, maybe for a particularly odd masquerade. But in a magical world where even students can perform transfiguration, wouldn't a wand wave be far simpler? Number 3. Aging potion. Here's one from canon. Goblet of Fire. Fred and George tried to cheat the age line around the goblet by aging themselves with this potion. Of course, it didn't work. And really, why would anyone willingly age themselves? There are far more reliable ways to alter appearance, like Polyjuice potion. The aging potion comes off more like a school prank than a serious magical tool. Number 4. Baruffio's brain elixir. It sounds ambitious. A potion supposedly designed to boost intelligence. Baruffio clearly wanted to go down in history as the alchemical Einstein, but in Order of the Phoenix, Madame Pince scoffs that it's more likely to scramble your brains than sharpen them. It's telling that neither Hermione nor any Ravenclaws ever use it. If it actually worked, they'd be pouring it into the teapot at every Hogwarts breakfast. But they don't. So we can only assume the potion is either ineffective or outright dangerous. Number 5. Babbling beverage. This drink turns the quietest soul into a babbling machine. It's mentioned in Order of the Phoenix when Snape snarks at Harry, "If I wanted nonsense, Potter, I'd give you babbling beverage." Essentially, it's verbal diarrhea in a bottle. Funny? Maybe. Practical? Not at all. In a world with a babbling curse, who felt the need to invent a potion that does the same thing? Number 6. Spiky-haired potion. And here it is, the king of absurd brews. This potion makes your hair stand on end. First mentioned in Chamber of Secrets, it's taught as if it's serious. But let's be honest, it's anything but. Perhaps it made the curriculum just for variety, but in practical terms, it's pure comic effect. Want to prank a friend? Sure. Going for a just electrocuted fashion statement? Maybe. But outside school hallways, total waste of ingredients. Number 7. Hiccuping solution. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry noticed 2 second years in the Hogwarts Express giggling over a vial of bright orange liquid. Moments later, one of them, likely a Hufflepuff, started hiccuping so violently his pumpkin pasty flew out of his hands. The other student burst into laughter, proud of the successful prank, but the effect didn't stop. The poor boy hiccuped all the way to Hogsmeade Station, red-faced and gasping between spasms. "Hic, help! Hic me!" he wheezed. No one could. The potion, often called the hiccuping draught, has never appeared in any official syllabus, and for good reason. It does one thing, and it does it poorly. The hiccups aren't amusing, they're disruptive. Professor Flitwick once had to halt a charms demonstration because a Ravenclaw girl had unknowingly sipped some during breakfast. "It sounds like she's being hexed," he said, trying not to smile. After 20 minutes, even Peeves told her to shut up. It isn't clever, it isn't dangerous, and it certainly isn't useful. If a wizard wants to annoy someone, there's Mimblewimble, Langlock, or even a good old stinging Jinx. Compared to those, the hiccuping draught feels like a child's idea of mischief, mildly inconvenient, immediately regrettable, and completely pointless. Number 8. Moaning Myrtle's sleep draft. Colin Creevey once tried Myrtle's sleep draft during his OWL study week. He thought a quick, magical nap would refresh him. It didn't. Within seconds of drinking it, he slumped face first onto his charm's notes. 2 minutes later, he shot upright, eyes wide and hair sticking out like a startled kneesel. "I feel worse," he muttered, blinking. Hermione, who'd been watching from across the table, frowned. "You look like you've just survived a boggart." The potion, referenced in supplemental material about the Hogwarts ghosts, was apparently passed around by Moaning Myrtle herself, who, according to legend, brewed it in one of the second-floor toilets. Its promise, immediate sleep, its flaw. The effect vanishes almost as quickly as it begins. Most students who've tried it wake up groggy, confused, and convinced they just blinked for a bit too long. "It's like being kissed by a pillow and slapped by a textbook," said Terry Boot, and in a world full of potent magical sleep aids, this one barely qualifies. The draught of living death can knock out a troll. Even standard sleeping draughts from Madame Pomfrey's stores offer proper rest. Myrtle's version is neither restful nor efficient. It's the magical equivalent of a yawn with glitter, pointless and vaguely irritating. When asked why she shared it, Myrtle simply replied, "I wanted them to know what it feels like to drift off forever." That answer alone made Susan Bones pour her unfinished vial straight down the toilet. A potion born in misery, delivering exhaustion. No one's come back for seconds. Number 9. Dancing tonic. Lee Jordan thought it would bring the house down. During the end-of-term feast, he slipped a vial of dancing tonic into Zachariah Smith's pumpkin juice. For the first 10 seconds, it was hilarious. Zachariah stood, stiffened, and began to twirl, then spin, then leap. "Someone hexed me!" he shouted mid-pirouette, but his feet didn't stop. The great hall roared with laughter until the 10th minute. Then the laughter faded. After half an hour, Zacharias was drenched in sweat, gasping for breath, still waltzing alone between the tables. Professor Flitwick immediately recognized the signs. "Dancing tonic," he said grimly, waving the crowd back. "We had a case of this in my 5th year. Took 3 hours to wear off." He tried a few counter-charms, but nothing worked. Zacharias collapsed eventually, twitching to the rhythm of some invisible music. Pomfrey had to carry him to the hospital wing using levitation. Lee earned a month of detention and a personal letter from Professor Sprout. I hope it was worth it. He won't be walking straight for a week. The potion itself is mentioned only briefly in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, a passing note about banned ingredients used by circus performers to force magical creatures into rhythmic motion. That alone should raise alarms. In a world where Tarantallegra exists, an instant charm that can be stopped with a wand flick, the tonic is unnecessary, excessive, and cruel. It offers no finesse, no control, just exhaustion. Even Fred and George never stocked it. "Too much cleanup," Fred explained. "And lawsuits." The tonic stands as a perfect example of magical overkill, a joke that forgets to stop being funny. Number 10. Sneezing syrup. It started in the charms corridor just after lunch. Ernie Macmillan took one sip from a silver flask he'd found in the Lost and Found, hoping it was pumpkin juice. It wasn't. Within seconds, he exploded into a violent sneeze, then another, then 12 more. "Achoo! Achoo! Oh, Merlin's pants!" he gasped between fits. Hannah Abbott tried casting quietus to calm him down. It didn't help. Professor Sprout had to levitate him straight to the hospital wing, sneezes echoing like explosions all the way. Pomfrey was livid. "Sneeze syrup," she said, eyes narrowing. "Why does this nonsense still exist?" The potion, described briefly in the Book of Spells by Miranda Goshawk, was never meant to be used on purpose. Even Fred and George called it too boring for their joke collection. "A prank that does one thing over and over?" Fred had once scoffed. "Please, we've got canary creams that turn people into birds." Sneeze syrup has no practical use. It doesn't cure colds. It doesn't hide your presence. It doesn't even create a big enough distraction to be useful. A well-aimed mucus ad nauseum curse would do far more damage in half the time. The syrup just forces your nose to betray you for hours with no off switch. Later that day, when Ernie finally calmed down, his eyes were bloodshot and his voice reduced to a whisper. "I sneezed so hard I think I saw into fifth year," he croaked. No one ever found out who left the flask. But Flitwick quietly added sneeze syrup to his list of highly discouraged substances, tucked neatly between love potions and ever-burping dust. Number 11, sparkling teeth elixir. Dennis Creevey wanted attention. He had borrowed a copy of Potioneer's Vanity Guide from a 6th year and stumbled upon a curious recipe, the Gleaming Grin Elixir. "One sip," the book promised, "and your teeth would shine like polished silver." Dennis brewed it in secret, hidden behind a stack of cauldrons in the Hogwarts kitchen. When he arrived at breakfast the next morning, his grin lit up the entire Great Hall. Literally. "Blimey, Dennis," said Lee Jordan, shielding his eyes. "You're blinding the sausages." At first, everyone laughed. Colin snapped half a dozen photos. Even McGonagall allowed herself a tight-lipped smirk. But the glow didn't fade. By lunchtime, Dennis couldn't eat properly. His teeth glowed through sandwiches, soup, even pumpkin juice. Peeves followed him for hours, chanting, "Sunshine smile, teeth like tile," and reflecting light off Dennis's mouth onto the portraits, who grumbled and turned away. "It's not supposed to last this long," Dennis muttered to Madame Pomfrey, who promptly confiscated the rest of the elixir and gave him a blackout charm for his lips. The potion's biggest flaw isn't just its ridiculous glow, it's that it has no off switch. Wizards already use charms to whiten their teeth or fix cosmetic issues. Even Filch, a squib, once muttered that he'd rather use Muggle toothpaste than walk around like a torch. There's no functional value in lighting up your mouth like a Christmas tree unless your goal is to scare off nifflers or illuminate a dungeon with a smile. Professor Slughorn, when asked about the elixir, sighed and said, "A proper potion should enhance your gifts, not make you look like a lost lantern." Dennis eventually returned to normal, but for a week he was known not as a Creevey but as Glowmouth, and no one ever touched that Vanity Guide again. Number 12, uncontrollable laughter potion. The first time Seamus Finnegan drank the laughing draught, he thought it was butterbeer. Fred had swapped bottles as a prank. 5 minutes later, Seamus was on the floor of the Great Hall, roaring with laughter at a bowl of mashed potatoes. Professor McGonagall stared in alarm. "Mr. Finnegan, has something possessed you?" she asked sharply, but Seamus could only gasp, tears running down his cheeks as he giggled. "The peas, they're looking at me." The potion's effect is relentless. Anything and everything becomes a source of uncontrollable amusement. When Lavender Brown spilled ink on her essay, Seamus laughed. When Dean Thomas dropped a book on his foot and limped away swearing, Seamus laughed harder. By the time a first year tripped and started crying and Seamus burst into hysterics, the laughter turned cruel. The room fell silent. "It's not funny," Hermione snapped. "It's not even normal." Hogwarts brewers list the potion in advanced texts under non-practical enchantments. It serves no medical purpose, no combat advantage, no real joy. Even Rictus Sempra, a basic tickling charm, wears off after a few moments and never turns laughter into madness. When a potion breaks your sense of empathy, Professor Slughorn once said, it's no longer harmless, it's dangerous. The potion does exactly that. It severs the link between emotion and reaction. You could watch your friend fall, your owl crash, even hear bad news, and still laugh. It was eventually banned from student use after a Ravenclaw girl drank it before her charms OWL. She laughed through the entire exam, fell off her chair, and had to be escorted out in hiccuping fits. It was like watching someone drown in joy they didn't feel, Madame Pomfrey reported. The laughing draught, for all its giggles, leaves behind something hollow, a reminder that forced laughter, like forced joy, is often worse than silence. Number 13, Stink Bomb Brew. It started in the dungeons, as many mischiefs do. A Slytherin 6th year named Malcolm Traver brewed the first batch of the infamous stench potion. According to Seamus Finnegan, who once had the misfortune of walking through the aftermath near the potion's classroom, it was like being punched in the face by rotten fish and old socks, worse than any dung bomb. The potion's scent, a sickening blend of spoiled eggs, sour cheese, and something disturbingly unidentifiable, clung to the air like a curse. The idea was simple: drive away Gryffindors from the common areas with pure nasal torture. And it worked, briefly. Fred and George Weasley recalled the time it was dumped near the portrait of the fat lady. "We thought someone had died," George later joked. "Turns out someone just got creative with their cauldron." But the victory was short-lived. Filch traced the stink back to the culprit within a day. Detentions were handed out like chocolate frogs. Brewing the potion wasn't just disgusting, it was dangerous. Neville Longbottom once attempted it during a dare and ended up melting half the cauldron from the acidic fumes. Even Professor Snape, not known for a delicate nose, commented dryly during class, "If any of you ever attempt that monstrosity again, I'll feed it to you myself." The potion never made it into any official curriculum for obvious reasons. And as for usefulness, none. A simple repello charm is far more effective for driving someone away, and without stinking up 3 floors of the castle. The stench potion, while a minor legend in Hogwarts history, stands as a perfect example of magic gone pointlessly wrong. Number 14, Eternal Belch Elixir. There are magical inventions that change the course of wizarding history: Felix Felicis, the Polyjuice Potion, Wolfsbane. And then there are those that make one wonder whether their existence is a prank, a mistake, or a dare taken too far. Among the most infamous of these is the rarely spoken of, profoundly unnecessary, and uncomfortably memorable concoction known as the elixir of eternal belching. The potion first appeared in the back pages of an obscure and unofficial collection titled Alchemical Antics, an irresponsible compendium of curious concoctions, published without ministry approval and circulated in limited underground circles. Although many dismissed it as an elaborate joke, rumors swirled that someone had actually brewed it and suffered the consequences. The potion's effects were, by all accounts, consistent. One uninterrupted stream of loud, involuntary belches, beginning moments after ingestion and varying wildly in pitch, tone, and, most alarmingly, content. While some sounded like exaggerated digestive events, others mimicked strange noises: creaking floorboards, banshee wails, or even voices. One particularly alarming case involved a 4th-year Slytherin who claimed his burp sounded like Professor Snape reading from Hogwarts, a history in monotone. What made the elixir of eternal belching more than a novelty was not its humour, but its endurance. The effects could last for up to 24 hours, with no reliable antidote. A prank that perhaps might have drawn a chuckle at breakfast became unbearable by lunchtime and sheer agony by dinner. Those who accidentally consumed the potion, and there were a few, remembered the experience with a mixture of horror and indigestion. One Hufflepuff girl reportedly had to sleep in the greenhouse because the dormitory wards couldn't block the sound of her echoing belches. Its most notable appearance in the mainstream magical world came from none other than George Weasley. In the years following the Second Wizarding War, George threw himself into the expansion of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes with more fervour than ever. The store became a sort of laboratory of absurdity, an ever-growing monument to mischief built on a foundation of brilliance. But not every idea was gold. Somewhere between the invention of the nose-biting teacup and the reversible vomit candy, George attempted to market an entire range under the name the Outragizer series. The goal was to create potions and gadgets that turned every moment into a public nuisance. The elixir of eternal belching was its flagship product. George, with his characteristic showmanship, gave a full demonstration outside the shop one breezy September afternoon in Diagon Alley. A banner unfurled with the tagline, "Why speak when your insides can scream for you?" Onlookers gathered with curiosity as George theatrically uncorked the bottle and took a sip. For the first 10 seconds nothing happened. Then from the depths of his stomach came a drawn-out belch that sounded eerily like Cornelius Fudge declaring a ministry decree. Another followed, mimicking an opera singer mid-aria. The crowd erupted in laughter, at first, but by the 4th minute, as the belching turned into shrill shrieks and low gurgles, the discomfort became palpable. A small child began crying. An old witch crossed herself with a protective rune. By the time George wheezed out something that resembled a blast-ended scroot mating call, even he looked panicked. "I think I may have made a mistake," he reportedly told his assistant, Lee Jordan, between monstrous belches that made the display windows rattle. The batch was pulled from the shelves within 48 hours. Only 3 bottles had been sold, and all 3 were returned, with written complaints and vague threats of litigation. Even Zonko's, known for its willingness to carry nearly anything that bordered on ridiculous, refused to stock it. Fred, had he been alive, might have advised George against it, not because of the chaos, but because, as Fred had once said, a proper prank stops just before it becomes torture. The potion itself was an oddity even in brewing, composed of flobberworm mucus, pickled leprechaun tongue, powdered shrivel fig, and a single drop of dragon bile. It took exactly 13 hours to complete, requiring stirring to the rhythm of a hiccuping house elf. The potion glowed faintly orange and smelled like stale butterbeer mixed with sulphur. It was said that one could feel it sloshing around in the stomach, as though it were alive and resentful. What baffled potion masters more than its effects was its sheer purposelessness. Most potions serve a goal: to heal, to transform, to protect, to deceive. But this one, as Professor Slughorn once remarked in private, it is, without question, the only potion I've encountered that achieves less than nothing. It actively undoes the peace of a room. Despite its failure as a product, the elixir found a strange place in Hogwarts lore. There were whispered tales of a Ravenclaw prefect who secretly brewed it to get out of public speaking. A 7th-year prankster in Gryffindor allegedly slipped it into the pumpkin juice during a school feast, resulting in 3 hours of symphonic belching from the staff table. Professor Trelawney, who claimed to have foreseen the event, simply placed a silk scarf over her ears and continued sipping her sherry. The Potion Regulations Department at the Ministry eventually classified the elixir as Class B nuisance potion, placing it alongside Giggle Draft and Toe Twitch Tonic. While not banned, it was strongly discouraged in enclosed public spaces. Aura Kingsley Shacklebolt, during his brief tenure overseeing magical civil disruptions, referred to it in a memo as an affront to the dignity of magical society. He was interrupted mid-speech by a belch-like noise during a press conference and never spoke of the potion again. Interestingly, the elixir once played a role in defusing an actual conflict. During a high-tension negotiation between 2 rival goblin clans over Gringotts' inheritance rights, an over-eager intern from the Department of Magical Creatures accidentally consumed the potion before entering the room. The intern's persistent, unpredictable belches, one of which sounded like a goblin curse in falsetto, so disrupted the proceedings that both clan leaders broke into uncontrollable laughter. The tension evaporated and the negotiation concluded peacefully. The intern was later awarded the Order of Merlin 3rd Class under the curious citation for unintentional diplomatic intervention. Number 15, Bubblehead Potion Game Version. There are potions that saved lives, there are potions that sealed destinies. And then there's the Head Bubble Potion, a concoction so wildly impractical, so comically absurd, that even the most eccentric inventors of Zonko's joke shop might raise a brow in concern. Known only to those who dared to explore the peculiar corners of magical video game adaptations, this potion made its sole appearance in the Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince video game, where it functioned less as a miracle of magical alchemy and more as a tool of embarrassment. Upon consumption, a gigantic translucent soap-like bubble would engulf the drinker's head. Yes, one could breathe inside it, and yes, technically it was meant to allow underwater exploration, but the execution was so catastrophically foolish that it has never been seriously studied by scholars at the Department of Magical Innovations. One can imagine Severus Snape's lip curling in distaste at such a concoction. This was not the sort of potion he would waste ingredients on, not even to scorn it before a classroom. For all the elaborate brews taught at Hogwarts, Draught of Living Death, Felix Felicis, Amortentia, This head bubble nonsense didn't deserve shelf space. The idea of entrusting one's survival underwater to a floating dish soap dome was laughable. Wizards had long relied on the bubble head charm, a sleek and elegant spell used with ease by qualified witches and wizards. Dumbledore himself performed such magic when retrieving the fake Horcrux in the cave. Yet this potion offered a sloppy, sticky alternative, looking more like a joke shop prank than a tool for underwater adventure. It is said the potion was created by a forgotten brewer named Arcturus Nibble, a man of little repute whose experiments often ended with side effects rather than solutions. His earlier creation, the self-pickling potion, had turned an entire shipment of pickled eel sandwiches into sentient, screaming jars. Arcturus believed the head bubble potion would offer a new method of aquatic breathing, especially for those who struggled with the bubble head charm's wand work. But in practice, the potion didn't just create a breathable environment, it replaced your entire face with what looked like a giant soap bubble. Students who volunteered to test the prototype emerged from the Hogwarts lake looking like sudsy ghosts, much to the delight of the Slytherins watching from the shore. If the effects weren't humiliating enough, the potion's drawbacks extended far beyond aesthetics. The bubble distorted vision, muffled sound, and refracted light in all directions, making it nearly impossible to navigate underwater. When one fifth-year named Oliver Bletchley attempted to use it during a practice dive near the Merpeople colony, he swam face first into a rock and emerged concussed and covered in kelp. Madame Pomfrey treated him for both the injury and the shame. As she muttered while applying dittany to his forehead, "If you want to look like a soap display in Madame Malkin's, go ahead, but don't bring that nonsense into my infirmary." The lack of logical application didn't stop younger students from viewing the potion as a novelty. It became something of a dare. Drink the head bubble potion before dinner. Try not to spill soup on yourself. See if Filch notices you sneaking into the restricted section looking like a glass-blown troll. There were even brief rumors that Moaning Myrtle had tried it, curious to see if the potion had any effect on ghosts. It didn't. The bubble passed through her head and drifted up through the ceiling, where it floated like a mournful jellyfish until Peeves popped it with a sharpened quill. In Professor Slughorn's class, the potion was never part of the official syllabus. However, a particularly mischievous Ravenclaw named Tamsin Vole once snuck it into a free brew day, arguing she wanted to study lesser-known magical fluids. Slughorn, ever the enthusiast for unusual potions. This reminds me of the time I nearly drank a bottle of vintage Felix that had turned to vinegar, allowed her to proceed. By the end of the class, Slughorn was wiping the potion residue off his moustache and declaring, "Well, it's certainly not ambrosia, my dear." The incident was quietly removed from the class logbook. In the corridors of Hogwarts, older students scoffed at the potion's existence. "That thing's just a prank wrapped in bubbles," muttered Cormac McLaggen one evening in the common room, while juggling a quaffle and trying to impress a group of fifth years. Real magic isn't meant to make you look like a goldfish at Madame Puddifoot's. Even Fred and George Weasley, renowned connoisseurs of magical absurdity, once experimented with the brew and rejected it. "Too ridiculous," George reportedly said, and that's coming from someone who sold skiving snack boxes to a centaur. The head bubble potion's reputation suffered further when it was tested for official ministry use. During a small-scale evaluation hosted by the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, a volunteer named Digby Scholefield attempted a 10-minute submersion in the Black Lake while wearing the bubble. He was later found drifting upside down in the shallows, muttering about giant squid reflections and underwater laughter. When interviewed by the Daily Prophet, he stated, "I couldn't tell if I was drowning or giggling. The bubble echoed my thoughts." The experiment was never repeated. Hogwarts' own library holds only one reference to the potion, a marginal note in Moste Potenti Potions, scribbled by a bored student in the 1980s, useful only if you want to look like a soap-blown blunder. Madame Pince tried to remove the comment but eventually gave up, deciding it served as an appropriate review. In contrast, books on the bubble-head charm describe it as a precise charm useful in potion fumes, underwater excursions and poisonous environments. Clearly, the magical world had moved beyond the need for oversized head bubbles. Even academically, the potion was useless. When Professor Vector assigned an essay on alternative methods of magical breathing, only one student dared to cite the head bubble potion. Her paper received a P with a note. While creative, you are encouraged to use examples rooted in reality. Indeed, the potion's existence has been largely confined to folklore, jokes, and outdated game cartridges stored in dusty trunks. A few years after the game's release, a former Hufflepuff student named Gordon Twicklesby opened a novelty shop in Knockturn Alley named Bubble Brains, entirely themed around the potion. Visitors could purchase enchanted headgear that mimicked the potion's effect. It became briefly fashionable among young wizards who wanted to look, ironically, magical. Twicklesby claimed to have refined the formula to remove the disorienting side effects, but no serious potion maker took his claims seriously. "It's like drinking bathwater," remarked one unsatisfied customer. The potion's absurdity became a favorite topic in wizarding comedy. A stand-up comic named Miriam Shufflebane once opened her show with the line, "I tried that new head bubble potion. Now I can finally breathe underwater and see my own shame in 360 degrees. Her routine included mimicking the way one would bump into coral while trying to speak through a soap dome. Audiences roared with laughter. It became one of the most quoted lines in the 2007 Wizarding Comedy Festival, number 16, Roaring Potion. It was once brewed by an obscure potioneer named Archibald Flange, a man known more for his booming laugh than for any academic contribution to magical science. Archibald, who lived alone in a crooked tower on the edge of the Great Fen near Little Droversby, believed the world needed more passion in its speech. His experiments, scribbled with erratic ink on scrolls scorched by tiny, self-made explosions, would later be catalogued posthumously in the lesser-read appendix of the Tales of Beadle the Bard. Among his many failed concoctions, one stood out for its sheer absurdity, the roaring potion. Upon ingestion, a whisper became a roar, a sentence turned into a savage bellow, and any attempt at calm conversation was immediately obliterated by uncontrollable vocal ferocity. It wasn't that the potion amplified sound in the way the sonorous charm did. The sonorous spell is used by Ludo Bagman during the Quidditch World Cup. "Sonorous!" he cried, and his voice boomed majestically across the stadium, provided a clean, clear enhancement. The roaring potion, by contrast, distorted the voice into a primal echo closer to a Hungarian horntail mid-range than a human speaking. The potion's magic seemed less concerned with communication and more invested in terrorizing the air around it. One can only speculate what led Archibald to create it. Perhaps he envisioned it as a defensive measure. Perhaps he had grown tired of being ignored at the ministry's annual Potioneers Symposium. Whatever the intent, the outcome was chaos. According to one record, when Archibald tested it during a public lecture entitled The Emotional Spectrum of Tinctures, he cleared the hall in less than 10 seconds. A single utterance of "good evening" caused 6 witches to faint, a wall tapestry to combust, and 3 owls to escape into the rafters, never to be seen again. The potion's formula itself wasn't particularly complex, but it required a rare component, powdered lion claw, something not easily obtained without crossing moral or legal boundaries. That alone made the potion controversial. Animal rights advocates within the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures raised concerns, arguing that no potion with such violent side effects should rely on the suffering of a magical or mundane creature. The potion thus faded into obscurity, considered one of magic's unnecessary and dangerous novelties. Yet the roaring potion wasn't entirely forgotten. In 1998, a battered recipe book was discovered in the Room of Requirement among the wreckage left after the Battle of Hogwarts. Belonging to a long-expelled student named Wilbur Titley, the pages contained crude annotations on how to improve the potion's stability. Wilbur, who was ejected from Hogwarts in 1962 for bewitching suits of armor to perform risque pantomimes, had apparently believed that the roaring potion could be used in theatrical settings. "If you can't get the crowd's attention, scare them," he had written. But even in drama, the potion proved more of a hazard than a help. Professor Slughorn once mentioned it in passing during an advanced NEWT-level potions class, his moustache twitching with amusement. "An ill-advised brew," he said, waving his wand to project a memory bubble of a potion that hissed and frothed red steam. The roaring potion has no real application, save for frightening livestock or obliterating windows. One sip, and your words become cannon blasts. His students, including Hermione Granger, took notes but rolled their eyes. In a world with precise charms, why would anyone need such a crude tool? Theoretically, it could serve as a burglar deterrent. A witch alone in a cottage might down a file and shout, "Go away!" with the fury of Fenrir Greyback. But this theory breaks down in practice. The potion offers no selectivity. Once consumed, everything becomes a roar, declarations of love, incantations, sneezes, and unlike spells, the potion doesn't wear off with a counter-charm. Its effects persist for hours, sometimes even days, depending on the dosage. Anecdotal accounts mention one unfortunate goblin banker who accidentally sipped from a mislabeled bottle and was forced to conduct negotiations in thunderous yells for 3 consecutive days. In one rare instance, the potion's use led to serious consequences. At the 1872 Muggle Wizard Peace Symposium, held secretly in a Scottish manor, an unnamed delegate reportedly drank the roaring potion, believing it to be mulled wine. His subsequent toast to cooperation shattered 7 goblets, caused 2 Muggle lords to faint, and brought the chandelier down with a mournful crash. The event was nearly exposed, and the potion was subsequently banned from all ministry-sponsored functions. A decree still in effect reads, "No volatile audio-enhancing elixirs, including but not limited to roaring potions, are permitted within ministry-registered venues." There was also a tragicomic incident involving a young Hufflepuff student named Gerald Crimp in 1935. Gerald, often overlooked and painfully shy, thought the potion might lend him some authority. After brewing it in secret over a week using ingredients stolen from Professor Snape's predecessor, he drank it during herbology to ask for a new trowel. His bellow of "Please may I have another?" ruptured 3 greenhouses. Professor Sprout, though sympathetic, had no choice but to report the incident. Gerald was suspended for a week and made to repair every shattered pane by hand. The potion's magic is not clean. It doesn't refine the user's voice. It amplifies every syllable into bestial magnitude. This leads to severe misunderstandings. There's an anecdote about a wizard named Tarquin Bellows who attempted to propose to his partner after taking a dose for dramatic flair. His shout of "Will you marry me?" was so violent it cracked a mirror and sent a flock of crows into a frenzy. His partner thought it was a prank, took offense, and left him at the altar. Tarquin never remarried, and the tale became a cautionary legend in the Department of Magical Mishaps. Even magical creatures react poorly to it. Hippogriffs become startled, thestrals flee, and even stubborn blast-ended scroots retreat from the sound. This unpredictability makes the potion unfit for fieldwork. Magizoologist Luna Scamander, née Lovegood, once tested a microdose while working in Albania. The result? She was chased for hours by a furious griffin, having accidentally roared near its nest. She later described the incident in The Quibbler as an educational mistake, much like licking a dirigible plum before checking the lunar tide. Number 17. Tactlessness tonic. There is a certain bottle, half filled with a dull, greyish liquid, stored on a dusty shelf in the farthest corner of the apothecary wing in the Department of Experimental Potions at the Ministry of Magic. A cobweb trails lazily from its neck, and no one dares touch it without gloves. Its label, handwritten in a curling scrawl, reads, "Tactlessness Draft, Extreme Caution Required." According to the sparse notes found in the margins of Mosta Potenta potions, it was brewed first by Ethelbald Thorne, a minor potioneer of the 18th century, known for his eccentric sense of humour and poor people skills. Supposedly, he had been attempting to concoct a truth serum that bypassed the occlumency defences of lying minds. Instead, what he created was a potion so socially destructive that it was banned from formal magical education, though somehow the recipe survived in whispered pranks and tragic anecdotes. The effects of the tactlessness draft are, in a word, catastrophic. Unlike veritaserum, which coaxes truth from the reluctant with a subtle edge, this potion strips away all nuance and discretion. The drinker becomes incapable of filtering their thoughts or moderating tone. They speak what they think, but not necessarily the truth. Instead, they offer a steady stream of biting remarks, crude observations, and unfortunate assessments with the cheery self-assurance of someone giving a wedding toast. The voice is confident, the content is ruinous. Fred and George Weasley, unsurprisingly, were fascinated when they first heard of it during a Hogsmeade trip in their 5th year. They had charmed Madame Rosmerta into telling them about the time a wizard from the Department of Magical Accidents drank it before the annual Magical Law Enforcement Ball. He reportedly told the Minister of Magic that he looked like a shaved puffskein with gout. By the end of the night, he had been banned from ever setting foot in the atrium again. The twins, who saw this as an extraordinary opportunity, spent the next 6 weeks attempting to replicate the potion in the Room of Requirement, only to be thwarted by its mercurial ingredients: spleen of Jarvie, tongue of Pixie, and 3 drops of insulted Banshee's tears. One verifiable incident involving the potion occurred during Professor Binns' rare absence from his classroom. For reasons never made entirely clear, Professor Horace Slughorn agreed to cover one of the history of magic lectures during Harry Potter's 6th year. While Slughorn was an affable man, fond of toffees and elite company, he was not known for his grasp of dates and historical events. To prepare for the long lecture, he reached into his travelling case and downed a vial of what he believed was pepper-up potion. It was not. What followed became legendary among students who attended that class. As reported by multiple sources, Neville Longbottom among them, Slughorn walked into the classroom wearing a carnation-pink waistcoat, blinking owlishly at the students, and immediately began recounting a revisionist version of the Goblin Rebellions, during which he suggested that goblins ought to thank wizards for domestic employment. He went on to refer to Hermione Granger's hand as alarmingly bushy, Ron's hair as a shade too ginger for polite company, and Lavender Brown's perfume as a failed potion. Students initially thought he was joking, but then he turned to the Slytherins and suggested that some inbreeding in that corner wouldn't be surprising. What made the experience more bewildering was Slughorn's complete obliviousness to the offence he caused. He chuckled, winked, and meandered through the hour, seemingly pleased with his own wit. The potion's brilliance, or perhaps its horror, lies in that very disconnect. The drinker believes they are being clever, sharp, and insightful, when in truth they are laying waste to every social bond in reach. "I don't think I've ever seen Seamus Finnegan cry before," said Dean Thomas afterwards, in a hushed voice. But after Slughorn called his essay the intellectual equivalent of a dung bomb, he just sat there and wiped his eyes with a serviette. Slughorn reportedly returned to his quarters after the class feeling oddly invigorated, unaware that half the student body had decided never to speak to him again. Only after a private conversation with Professor McGonagall, delivered in a tone so cold it nearly froze the suits of armour, did Slughorn begin to suspect something had gone terribly wrong. He never taught history of magic again. It is worth noting that the potion does not bring out deeply hidden truths or unearth buried grudges. It doesn't even necessarily reflect the drinker's actual opinions. Rather, it scrambles their sense of timing, tact, and tone, producing statements that are as inappropriate as they are unfiltered. It's a magnifying glass to the worst parts of spontaneous speech. The results are rarely funny, though Fred and George did try it on Argus Filch's cat, Mrs. Norris, in a failed experiment involving a magical megaphone. The cat simply hissed at them, but the megaphone announced, "You smell of expired treacle tart," loud enough to shatter a nearby window. There were rumours, never officially confirmed, that the potion was once considered by the Department of Magical Defence as a potential interrogation tool. However, after one unfortunate Auror volunteered for testing and promptly insulted 3 senior officials, the trial was discontinued. "It was the longest disciplinary hearing I've ever sat through," one ministry employee was heard to mutter at the leaky cauldron, "and not one useful thing came out of his mouth." Even more curious is the question of whether Severus Snape ever encountered the potion. While he never spoke of it, and it was never found in his private stores, There are those who believe one of his more infamous rants during Harry's 5th year may have been influenced by a mismeasured ingredient. During an advanced NEWT lesson, Snape allegedly told Parvati Patil that her potion looked like a bowl of vomit stirred by a half-wit troll, and remarked to Neville that if brains were ingredients, he'd be stirring with an empty ladle. While this may seem in character, some students who knew him best said there was an odd glint in his eye that day, a strange pleasure in the meanness, almost as though he couldn't help himself. Luna Lovegood once speculated quite seriously that the potion might be a byproduct of Raxburgh distillation, claiming that it muddles the tact filter in the temporal lobe. While most dismissed this theory, Professor Flitwick was seen scribbling something in a small notebook not long after. Magical neurosciences being a rather underdeveloped field, no definitive conclusion was ever drawn. The magical community has long debated whether the potion should be outlawed entirely. While not inherently harmful in the way a curse of the bogies or a shrinking hex might be, its consequences are socially corrosive. There's no antidote once swallowed, and the effects last a full hour, often with a lingering residue of embarrassment and regret. The only known remedy is silence, which unfortunately the drinker has no inclination to employ. During a rare open lecture at St. Mungo's, healer Miriam Bottlemere recounted the case of a young witch who drank the potion as a dare during her sister's wedding. Within minutes, she had insulted the groom's heritage, the bride's dress, the table settings, and the officiating wizard's pronunciation. "We had to obliviate 3 muggles and give her a week's worth of calming draught," Bottlemere explained. "She still hasn't been invited to any family gatherings." Hogwarts has quietly forbidden the potion's presence on school grounds. While it doesn't appear in the standard syllabus, it is occasionally referenced in Professor Slughorn's private brewing club as a cautionary tale. "Never mistake wit for cruelty," he once said, raising a glass of elderflower wine, "and never mistake that potion for pepper-up again." One of the few surviving vials is currently housed in the restricted section of the Hogwarts Library, behind a glass case inscribed with the words, "Do not open unless you wish to become your worst self." Madame Pince polishes the case every Thursday, muttering under her breath about ungrateful children and delinquent twins. Some students claim that Peeves the poltergeist managed to sneak a drop into the Slytherin water supply one year. For 3 days the entire house was filled with snide remarks, veiled insults, and roaring laughter that turned to tears when someone commented on Pansy Parkinson's laugh. Whether this was the draught or simply adolescence remains unclear. In a peculiar twist of fate, the tactlessness draught was nominated for the Most Useless Potion Award by the Society for Practical Alchemy in 1974. It won. The parchment certificate, awarded to a now-deceased Thorn descendant, reads, "For services to chaos and the complete ruin of conversation." What makes the potion uniquely insidious is its ability to fracture trust. Wizards and witches pride themselves on a certain level of control over their words. Unlike muggles, they must often speak carefully. Spells can hinge on a syllable, a whisper can enchant or curse. To remove that filter is to make one vulnerable in the most humiliating way. A wandless hex is dangerous. A tactless sentence can destroy a life. It is perhaps a testament to wizardkind's stubborn curiosity that the potion continues to exist, even if only as an academic footnote. Every few years a student will stumble across its recipe and consider just for a moment what it might be like to brew it. Most dismiss the idea, a few try, none try twice. Of all the magic in the wizarding world, the tactlessness draught is among the few that reminds us just how fragile civility can be. It requires no dark arts, no forbidden incantations, just a sip and a smile and the willingness to say what should never be said. Number 18, Glassy Gaze Potion. They found it in the back of a ruined cupboard in an abandoned apothecary in Nocturne Alley. Dust layered thick across every surface like time itself had grown tired and lain down to sleep. The bottle was stoppered with red wax, its label so faded only the bold scrawl Vitrinoculus remained, smudged beneath the cracked glass. A team of magical archivists led by Millicent Blott The retired Hogwarts librarian catalogued the finding without ceremony. It would have gone unnoticed except that one young intern from St. Mungo's named Etta Flinch uncorked it on a dare. And so once again the world was forced to remember the most bafflingly useless potion in wizarding history, the glass-eyed draught. The immediate result of drinking it? Etta's brown eyes lost all vitality. Her irises turned dull and cloudy, as though a storm had passed behind them and left only fog. It was like looking into the eyes of a mannequin in Madame Malkin's window, one witness said, all soul gone, like a wax figure trying to pretend to be alive. Etta herself reported dizziness, a tingling in her temples, and an inability to judge distance properly. She tripped twice on the way out of the building and mistook a lamppost for her supervisor. The effects wore off after several hours, but the memory lingered with a kind of embarrassment more potent than the potion itself. No one knows who first brewed the glass-eyed draught. It was only ever mentioned once in an obscure 1846 issue of the Daily Prophet, tucked into the brewer's blunders column between a misfired aging elixir and a batch of tea that turned drinkers' tongues blue. The entry read, "An unnamed potioneer in Wigtown reports an accidental synthesis resulting in complete ocular flattening, victim's expression now eerily blank and unsettling to house pets. Potion deemed without strategic value." It was a cruel joke of alchemy, an experiment gone wrong that somehow never quite disappeared. The potion's ingredients are relatively benign: powdered moonstone, thestral hair, dew from a graveyard at dawn, and the essence of Gorgon's breath, diluted, of course. The process itself is finicky, requiring the brewer to stir counterclockwise precisely 13 times and chant a fragment of an ancient lullaby while the steam changes colour from grey to a sickly pale green. It takes 6 hours to cool. The final liquid has a milky, glassy sheen like the surface of a pond moments before it freezes over. Aurelius Kettleburn, once a controversial professor of experimental potioneering at Durmstrang, attempted to repurpose the draught as a theatrical aid. He proposed that actors in plays about the inferi or other emotionless creatures could use the potion to enhance the realism of their performance. His one public demonstration, however, ended in disaster. The actor drank the potion and promptly walked off the edge of the stage, breaking his nose and requiring a week in spell stasis to recover. Kettleburn was quietly asked to resign. Though many have attempted to assign the draught a practical use, it resists function at every turn. During a brief revival in the 1970s, it was marketed to certain eccentric wizards under the label "Become a Mystery." The advertising campaign showed moody black and white photographs of witches staring blankly into the distance. Sales were minimal. Why pay 2 galleons to look like you've just been stunned by heartbreak? One review sniped in, "Witch broomstick." A simple disillusionment charm would do better. Even in the shadowy corners of the dark arts, the potion finds little purpose. One might imagine that a blank gaze could intimidate or mislead, but most Death Eaters preferred intimidation with actual substance. Bellatrix Lestrange once ridiculed a junior recruit for using the draught during a raid. "I want madness in your eyes, not mud," she was heard to sneer, before casting the Cruciatus curse on him for incompetence. The potion's effect, though eerie, inspired discomfort rather than fear. It was too passive, too silent. Evil, it seemed, needed animation, not vacancy. Perhaps the most famous anecdote involving the glass-eyed draught is the story of Quentin Polk, a minor clerk at the Department of Mysteries. Obsessed with remaining unnoticed, Quentin believed the potion would make him invisible in plain sight. "People don't look twice at the lifeless," he wrote in a journal later discovered in his office. He drank the potion every morning for 6 months, living in a dull-eyed haze. While it's true that few interacted with him during that period, colleagues mostly attributed it to his increasingly strange behavior and inability to hold eye contact. "It was like talking to a picture on the wall," said one co-worker. Eventually, Polk wandered into one of the department's more dangerous chambers and was not seen again. The potion also has a uniquely bad reputation among the younger generation of witches and wizards, particularly those active on Wiznet. One popular magical influencer, Cassia Gold, famously drank the draft on a live stream, attempting to prove it could create a freak chic aesthetic. Her immediate reaction was confusion. "It's like I look dead, not in a cool vampire way, but like a forgotten portrait in a damp corridor." Followers agreed. The hashtag, "Are you a vitrinoculous fail?" trended for a week, and a St. Mungo's specialist later issued a warning about potential retina fatigue if consumed more than once a month. Rita Skeeter, in her infamous post-war book, The Cauldron and the Quill, mentioned the potion in a footnote as an example of flawed brewing logic, and claimed that even Gilderoy Lockhart refused to endorse it, despite once approving a lotion that turned fingernails invisible. "There is no charm in hollowness," Lockhart allegedly remarked. "Even I draw the line somewhere." One curious side effect of the potion is its impact on magical creatures. Owls appear especially disturbed by the glassy-eyed stare. There have been recorded incidents of post owls refusing to deliver letters to individuals under the influence of the draft. One case, reported in the archives of the Owlry Guild, involved a wizard named Thorby Penkins, whose owl simply dropped all correspondence outside his cottage and fled. It is speculated that the unnatural stillness in the eyes disrupts the magical recognition cues animals rely on. Some historians have tried to connect the draft to ancient rituals or secret societies, arguing that its original use might have been symbolic. In a 1932 essay by Professor Selwyn of the Magical Anthropology Board, he posited that certain pre-Melinic covens may have used the potion during funerary rites to mimic death in the living, allowing practitioners to commune with spirits without alerting death itself. However, no concrete evidence supports this, and most scholars dismiss it as fanciful speculation. The draft's effects, while physically harmless, often leave a lingering emotional imprint. Those who have tried it frequently report a sense of detachment and unease lasting several hours. "It's like your own eyes turn against you," said Agatha Bembridge, a former aura, who once ingested the potion as part of an experimental training. "You look in the mirror and don't recognize the person staring back, and then it hits you, that's you, but hollowed out." Some report vivid dreams of floating aimlessly or being locked behind glass. Hogwarts once banned the potion after a student prank involving the draft resulted in 3 Ravenclaw prefects spending a full day unable to read their textbooks. Their gaze couldn't focus, and their exam scores dropped so drastically that Professor Flitwick had to personally oversee a resit. "This is not what Rowena Ravenclaw would have considered a clever use of potions," he was quoted as saying, visibly disappointed. Portraits and magical paintings also respond unusually to the draft's influence. Several reports from the wizarding art community suggest that subjects of paintings actively avoid interacting with individuals under the potion's effect. Sir Cadogan, the famously erratic portrait knight, once refused to allow entry to a Gryffindor student who had recently taken a sample dose. "Thou hast the gaze of a cursed gargoyle," he declared. "No friend of mine shall pass with such vacant orbs." Even the mirror of Erised has reacted strangely. In a restricted experiment conducted by the Department of Magical Artifacts, a volunteer who had consumed the draft stood before the mirror and saw nothing. Not their heart's desire, not even their own reflection. Just the pale gleam of glass, staring back. It's the only known instance of the mirror failing to display any vision at all. Some believe this further proves the potion dampens not only sight but intention. Perhaps the most tragic use of the potion came during the First Wizarding War. In a desperate attempt to avoid detection by snatchers, a small group of Muggleborns brewed and drank the draft in hiding. The plan was to appear vacant and lifeless, hoping to be overlooked. The results were catastrophic. Their lack of focus and impaired coordination made them easy targets. Only one survivor, a woman named Lorna Twill, lived to tell the story. She later described the experience as drifting through a fog where hope couldn't find you. Despite all this, the potion refuses to be entirely forgotten. It remains on the inventory list of obscure ingredients in the back of Moste Potente potions, and occasionally crops up in advanced brewing discussions as a cautionary tale. Glass-eyed draught, one master brewer wrote, reminds us that not all potions must serve a purpose. Some exist simply to show us what happens when soul is stripped away from form. It is a potion of mirrors, of vacant rooms, of empty picture frames and dolls propped on shelves. There is no malevolence in it, but there is no meaning either. It is the whisper of emptiness in a crowded corridor, the fog that refuses to lift. Perhaps that in itself is its only truth. A potion that, once drunk, leaves you wondering whether you were ever fully seen to begin with. Number 19, Slow Wink Elixir. Of all the potions ever brewed in the shadowy dungeons of Hogwarts, few have stirred as much confusion and embarrassment as the notoriously impractical potion of slowed winking. Conceived, some believe, as a joke between rival potion masters during a symposium in Nocturne Alley, this peculiar concoction creates a bizarre and wholly inconvenient effect. The imbiber's blinking slows to such a degree that each blink appears deliberate, awkward, and painfully prolonged. Rather than a casual twitch of the eyelid, the motion becomes a drawn-out gesture, taking up to 5 seconds to complete, long enough for everyone in the vicinity to notice, misinterpret, and ultimately recoil in discomfort. The potion was catalogued in the 18th edition of Moste Potente Potions, revised and ridiculed, wedged between such eccentric brews as the hair-singing serum and nose-flute draught. According to its description, the potion of slowed winking was developed by a little-known potion enthusiast named Elfrida Mumpsbury, whose experimental work in emotional enhancement potions veered more into the comedic than the romantic. Elfrida's intention, allegedly, was to craft a love potion that allowed for more lingering eye contact, believing that sustained blinks might be interpreted as signs of deep affection. What she achieved instead was a recipe for social catastrophe. The recipe itself was deceptively straightforward: the crushed petals of 3 moonflowers, 1 drop of acromantula venom for viscosity, a single lash of a demi-guise, acquired humanely, according to the author, and a whisper of peppermint for aftertaste. The brewing instructions required the potion to be stirred counterclockwise during a waning moon, all while reciting a line of romantic poetry, a step that further indicates the potion's originally intended purpose. Yet from its very first use, its failure was evident. Instead of romance, it inspired ridicule. One of the few documented uses of the potion occurred in the Gryffindor common room in February of Harry's 6th year. A young 4th-year student by the name of Godfrey Twelvetree had, for weeks, harboured a grand infatuation with Lavender Brown. Inspired by her dramatic nature and flowery handwriting, he decided that a theatrical display of affection would win her heart. Rather than flowers or poetry, he opted for the potion of slowed winking, which he discovered in the restricted section under a charm meant to deter casual readers. How he bypassed Madame Pince remains a mystery, though some suspect he bribed her cat with aniseed treats. Godfrey timed his performance for the evening hours, just as Lavender was returning from divination with Parvati Patil. He positioned himself near the fireplace, the dim lighting casting shadows across his freckled face, and waited until she passed. Then, in a tragic act of romantic delusion, he blinked, slowly, meaningfully, as though his eyelids were being drawn down by invisible threads. What was meant to be alluring came off as unsettling, and Lavender, never one to mask her feelings, recoiled. "Is something wrong with your eyes?" she snapped, loud enough to draw attention from Seamus and Dean. Embarrassed, Godfrey tried to explain, but by that point the potion had fully taken effect. His eyes drooped closed again, this time even slower, and when he reopened them, Lavender was already muttering something about creepy vibes and walking off. Moments later, he received a sharp cuff to the back of his head, courtesy of Ron Weasley, who had only recently broken up with Lavender and saw Godfrey's theatrics as opportunistic. That night, Godfrey's misadventure with the potion was retold across 3 common rooms and the Hufflepuff greenhouses. By morning, even Professor Slughorn had heard of it, chuckling behind his mustache and murmuring something about youthful passion and very poor potion choices. Though comically ineffective, the potion found its way into Hogwarts' unofficial curriculum of legendary mishaps. In later years, students referenced it in jest whenever someone made a fool of themselves in front of a crush. "Careful," one might whisper, "you're to blinking like a 12-tree." The name became synonymous with romantic blunders, and Godfrey himself eventually embraced the legacy, claiming in his 7th year that he had pioneered an entirely new form of expressive blinking. Interestingly, the potion of slowed winking found a second life in the bizarre world of experimental wizard theatre. In the spring of 2004, a group of avant-garde performers in Diagon Alley used it during a performance of The Wand and the Wound, a melodramatic tragedy about a lovesick ghost and his cursed broomstick. Every actor drank the potion before curtain, resulting in a stage full of slow, deliberate blinks that some critics called haunting, while others described it as excruciatingly slow-motion overacting. Despite its lack of popularity, the performance gained a small cult following, especially among eccentric Ravenclaws and drama club alumni. Professor Snape, during his tenure as potions master, dismissed the potion outright in a margin note found in one of the older Hogwarts textbooks. "A waste of ingredients and time. Effects mimic the behavior of drunk flobberworms, only useful if one wishes to be mistaken for mentally compromised." Yet even Snape's scorn couldn't entirely erase the potion's odd charm. There's something undeniably amusing about a potion whose only visible effect is to make you look like you're trying far too hard to be seductive. The Ministry of Magic's Department of Experimental Potions reviewed the concoction in 1992 after a prank at St. Mungo's, where a healer unknowingly dozed himself during a flirtatious exchange in the tea room. The slow winks were interpreted as mockery by the object of his affection, a fellow healer known for her short temper, and the resulting argument led to a spilled cauldron and 2 singed eyebrows. The incident was serious enough to warrant a formal ban on the potion's use in any romantic context within the hospital. A report issued afterward classified it under Category Z, functionally absurd but not actively dangerous. Some believe the potion's effects go deeper than they appear. The Department of Mysteries once acquired a sample to test whether prolonged blinking could alter time perception. One unsanctioned experiment involved placing an unspeakable in a room with nothing but the potion and a mirror. The results were inconclusive, though the subject allegedly emerged 48 hours later, whispering about eyelids that know too much and refusing to blink at all. The incident was quietly classified, and the file marked with the same insignia used for the veil in the death chamber. At least one potioneer, eccentric recluse Archibald Quiverley, attempted to repurpose the potion as a tool for covert communication. He theorized that slowed blinks could be used in a sort of visual Morse code for spies. A series of tests with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, however, proved disastrous. Messages took too long to convey, and one aura fell asleep mid-communication. Quiverley eventually conceded defeat, though he published a scathing essay in Wand and Cauldron Quarterly titled "The Ministry Has No Eye for Genius." As for practical use, some suggest the potion might serve as an excellent deterrent in awkward social situations. By appearing constantly uncomfortable or overly forward, the drinker becomes socially repellent, thus avoiding unwanted conversations or invitations. This tactic was briefly employed by Ernie Macmillan during the Yule Ball of the 1994. Desperate to avoid dancing with Eloise Midgen, he feigned stomach troubles, drank the potion behind the tapestry near the Great Hall, and spent the rest of the evening blinking like a bewitched marionette. Eloise, startled and mildly offended, avoided him for the remainder of term. The visual absurdity of the potion's effect also inspired a small line of joke merchandise at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. Fred and George experimented with a candy version called Slow Lid Licorice, which mimicked the potion's effects for 5 minutes. Marketed as perfect for pretending to notice someone across the room, for a very long time, it sold modestly during Valentine's week but never became a staple. Most customers preferred their mischief to be louder, messier, and more colourful. In rare instances, the potion's effect has been mistaken for a magical ailment. One unfortunate case involved a wizard at the Leaky Cauldron who had unknowingly sipped from a mislabeled bottle left behind by a Hogwarts graduate celebrating his newt. A nearby healer mistook the symptom for a stroke-inducing curse and performed a series of painful diagnostics before the man could croak out the truth. Since then, potion shops are required to label all romance-themed brews with a red heart and warning text, thanks to an amendment proposed by none other than Hermione Granger during her post-Hogwarts tenure at the Department for Magical Law. Perhaps most tellingly, the potion has been used by portrait painters seeking to capture the essence of hesitation. One famous work by magical realist artist Camilla Spindlebrush depicts a witch in the middle of a prolonged blink, her eyes halfway closed, expression caught between mystery and discomfort. The piece, titled Waiting for You to Blink Back, hangs in the foyer of the International Society for Magical Surrealism and is often cited as a perfect visual metaphor for emotional miscommunication. Despite its uselessness, the potion of slowed winking has achieved a strange immortality in magical folklore. Students still whisper its name during late-night dares in the Slytherin common room. A Hogwarts ghost, likely the Grey Lady, has been overheard muttering about the boy with the sad, slow eyelids. The potion persists not because it offers value, but because it perfectly captures a universal truth. Even in a world of magic, not every invention is useful. And sometimes, that's precisely what makes it unforgettable. Number 20. Predictability Draft. In the dusty bottom shelf of Slughorn's private cabinet, wedged between an unlabeled phial of bubbling grey mucus and a vial of essence of insipidity, there lies a curious potion most students at Hogwarts never hear about: Pink Predictability Draft. A softly shimmering rose-coloured liquid, it emits the faint scent of talcum powder and boredom. While some potions promise greatness, clarity, or transformation, this one offers only the dismal certainty of dullness. Few know the origin of this elixir, though rumour among professors claims it was first brewed by a half-blood witch named Marjolaine Pottleshine in the late 19th century. A respected if overly cautious Ravenclaw, Marjolaine feared the unpredictability of human behaviour, especially in her younger brother, who famously set fire to 3 broom closets and an enchanted tapestry during his first week at Hogwarts. Her goal had been simple: create a potion that would suppress impulsivity and promote social conformity. What she produced, however, became a subject of quiet embarrassment in the academic brewing community. The Pink Predictability Draft, when consumed, strips the drinker of spontaneity, imagination, and deviation from expected social behaviour. The subject begins to speak in overly generic statements. I agree with that sentiment, or it is what it is, regardless of the situation. Laughter is reduced to a mechanical, identical chuckle. Their behaviour aligns so rigidly with others' expectations that even divination professors claim it spoils the fun of scrying their future. Perhaps the most infamous use of the potion occurred in 1971 during the first term of a particularly chaotic class of first years. Professor Minerva McGonagall, then relatively early in her teaching career, faced a challenge in the form of Garrick Froome, a red-haired Gryffindor boy whose idea of humour included animating furniture to perform slapstick routines during History of Magic. After his third near expulsion, Professor Slughorn suggested half-jokingly a dose of predictability draft. Garrick was given a single teaspoon before his next lesson. What followed was not discipline, but devastation. Garrick no longer smiled. He sat in class with his hands folded neatly, answering every question with, "Whatever you think is best." When a classmate accidentally spilled ink on his robes, he simply muttered, "That's understandable," and returned to his parchment without emotion. He did not participate in any jokes, arguments, or competitions. For the rest of the week he wandered Hogwarts corridors mumbling empty affirmations. After 5 days the potion wore off. Garrick burst into tears in the Great Hall, sobbing that he'd felt like a ghost of a person. He never misbehaved again, but he also never spoke more than a few sentences to anyone outside class. This case, quietly recorded in Professor McGonagall's private notes, served as a warning to future staff. And yet occasionally the potion would be used again, always under the illusion that the chaos of youth could be solved by making children more agreeable. The truth, as history proved, was that agreement without emotion or originality created only isolation. The potion's effect isn't purely behavioral. Magical diagnostics conducted by Madame Pomfrey during a brief experimental phase in the early 1980s showed that brainwave patterns in affected students slowed significantly, mimicking a sleep-adjacent state. Their magical aura dulled, even their patronuses, when summoned, though rarely attempted under its influence, would flicker and fail to form completely. As Dumbledore once noted in a confidential staff memo, this potion does not bring order. It removes the soul's capacity for chaos, and with it, its voice. When Dolores Umbridge arrived at Hogwarts in 1995 and began implementing her regime of corrective oversight, she found the pink predictability draft to be disturbingly aligned with her values. She inquired about its application for certain students who had challenged her authority, particularly members of Dumbledore's army. Fortunately, Snape had already moved the potion's base ingredients to a locked drawer, and it was never deployed. Still, the mere suggestion of its use in the context of suppression gave the draft its unofficial nickname, the Tyrant's Tea. Interestingly, the potion's ineffectiveness in practical education is part of what sealed its fate. Students under its influence failed to show critical thinking. In defense against the dark arts, they blocked predictable spells, ignored unusual threats, and could not improvise. In Transfiguration, they defaulted to incorrect forms simply because the instructions weren't explicitly spelled out. In Potions, they added ingredients based on assumptions, not adaptation. Predictability proved again and again to be the enemy of progress. One of the more curious side effects, however, occurred in the brief period it was tested on Ravenclaw students for a study on social conformity. Professor Flitwick, ever the experimentalist, allowed 4 volunteers, Penelope Stride, Bexley Turns, Gilbert Crumb, and Owain Gossamer, to take small doses over the course of 3 days. At first, their behavior appeared calmer, more agreeable, but by day 2, all 4 had independently submitted essays that were word-for-word identical, even in punctuation. When questioned, each insisted they had come up with the ideas themselves and had no memory of collaboration. The pink predictability draft doesn't rob memory, but it apparently encourages such rigid thought patterns that originality becomes near impossible. Creativity, under its influence, is viewed as a threat to cohesion. Bexley, a talented sketch artist, destroyed his own portfolio after the test, claiming art only causes confusion. He never painted again. The trial was ended early. Even Fred and George Weasley, who caught wind of the draft in their 3rd year, briefly experimented with it as a prank ingredient. They slipped a few drops into Percy's tea during the Christmas holidays, hoping to see their rigid older brother behave like a well-programmed automaton. But Percy's natural inclinations were so aligned with the potion's effects that no one noticed any difference. George later wrote in his journal, "The potion's only use is to turn everyone into Percy." In social contexts, the draft is considered catastrophic. Students who drink it during parties or feasts often become so monotonous that others abandon them mid-conversation. Romances collapse overnight. Luna Lovegood, upon hearing of the potion, simply tilted her head and whispered, "I suppose it's what Nargles would drink to become accountants." She refused to let anyone near her food. During the term, it was briefly reintroduced as a disciplinary tool. More disturbingly, those under its influence begin to internalize the idea that deviation is wrong. A Hufflepuff student named Olive Wisp reportedly refused to eat anything but toast with a specific amount of marmalade 3 days after taking the potion. She cited, "This is what everyone expects me to eat." It took 2 weeks of counseling with Madame Pomfrey to restore her sense of personal agency. From a brewing standpoint, the potion is deceptively simple. It requires crushed pearl root, essence of gillygrass, powdered moonvine, and a single drop of mimic's blood. The mimic's blood, an extremely rare and ethically problematic ingredient, provides the draft its magical essence of replication. It is the reason why those under its effect repeat patterns, behaviors, even phrases. The blood links the user's magical field to collective expectations in the room. Snape's personal notes, unearthed after the Battle of Hogwarts, include a short but cutting remark. Predictability is not order, it is death in motion. He had refused to teach the potion during his tenure and warned students who inquired about it that its only reliable effect is the annihilation of charm, humor, and humanity. What makes the potion particularly insidious is that it does not induce pain, fear, or direct harm. Instead, it invites the illusion of peace. Parents occasionally wrote to Hogwarts inquiring about its use, requesting that their children be given small doses to adjust their attitude. These requests were denied. As Professor Sprout once noted in a staff meeting, if a daisy grows crooked, you don't hammer it into place, you turn it toward the sun. There are rare instances where the potion is still used, almost always illegally. Ministry interrogations in the 1980s reportedly dosed minor suspects with diluted versions in an attempt to elicit compliant behavior. The practice was banned after the Wizengamot declared that such testimony could not be considered voluntary or truthful. The witness may agree, the ruling stated, but agreement is not understanding. In truth, the potion's value lies only in warning us of its existence. It reminds magical society that predictability, though tempting, is not synonymous with goodness or wisdom. Every great spell, every daring act of heroism, every burst of magical creativity depends on the unexpected. Hogwarts now teaches the draft only as a theoretical subject in Newt-level potions. It is presented alongside discussions of agency, free will, and magical ethics. Hermione Granger, when later asked about it during her time as Minister for Magic, remarked, "It's the saddest potion I've ever studied. It makes you polite at the price of your soul." It is a potion that turns students into echoes, removes the luster of curiosity, and reduces the vibrant spectrum of magical individuality to a pale, predictable shade of beige. In a world built on surprise and wonder, the pink predictability draft serves as a gentle but terrible reminder. Without unpredictability, even magic begins to feel mechanical. Would you take a potion that made everyone love you because you always did what they expected? Perhaps. But love that is earned through surprise, through real choice, burns brighter. As Dumbledore once said, it is our choices that show what we truly are. Pink predictability strips you of choices, and in doing so it strips you of truth. Number 21, anti-yawn elixir. There are potions that save lives, mend broken bones, restore memory, and even extend life. Then there are potions like the reversal yawn draft, a concoction so baffling in its purpose and so obscure in its application that even Professor Slughorn, a collector of oddities and rare elixirs, once remarked during a private dinner at the Slug Club, "Useful? Only if you consider voluntary torture an educational strategy." The potion, a thin, almost translucent blue liquid with a strange aftertaste of old mint and metal, has one curious effect. It makes yawning physically impossible for several hours, regardless of fatigue, boredom, or lack of sleep. And while the idea might sound amusing, or even clever in theory, the consequences of its use tell a far grimmer story. The draught was first brewed in 1824 by Magenta Loxley, a particularly intense potioneer from the Department of Experimental Education at the Ministry of Magic. At the time, Hogwarts had been receiving a flurry of complaints from aging lecturers who found the visible signs of student exhaustion, particularly yawning, insulting and demoralizing. Chief among the complainers was Professor Cuthbert Binns, who, even in his ghostly form, maintained an incredible capacity to be both undistracted by students and deeply annoyed by any perceived lack of respect. In a letter preserved in the Hogwarts archive, he wrote, "A yawning student is a declaration of rebellion, a mutiny of manners." The potion was introduced as part of an experimental classroom program during the 1825-1826 academic year, where Ravenclaw third years became the first unfortunate subjects. Among them was Beatrix Clearstone, a girl who would later be awarded the Order of Merlin First Class for her work in magical neurology. In a diary entry dated March 3, 1826, she wrote, This vile little bottle should be shattered and banned. It stops yawns, but not the tiredness. Instead, the tension builds and builds until your jaw aches, your eyes water, and your mind can think of nothing else. I failed a practical exam today. I couldn't focus with my face clenched like a gargoyle's. The potion's effects are as consistent as they are cruel. Once ingested, the magical agents target the reflexive mechanism of yawning, essentially freezing the involuntary muscle response. But the body, intelligent and stubborn in its design, still tries to yawn. And the result? A physical war between impulse and inhibition, often visible in the twisted expressions of the user. Eyebrows twitch, noses wrinkle. Jaws vibrate subtly with the frustrated attempt. It is not subtle, it is not pleasant, it is not useful. Despite its dubious benefit, the reversal yawn draft continued to circulate in magical academic circles for decades. By the 1950s, it had made its way into the curriculum of less reputable wizarding academies, such as the Marlow Institute for Rigorous Discipline in Eastern England, where headmaster Ignatius Blatter was obsessed with alertness without external influence. Blatter believed the potion instilled discipline by forcing the mind to overcome the body's laziness. By the time the ministry reviewed the results in 1961, dozens of students had suffered facial cramps, sleeplessness, and even mild hallucinations after prolonged use. Even Hogwarts itself did not remain immune to this trend. For a brief time during the early 1970s, a young Professor Vector, frustrated by her students' lack of attention during arithmancy, ordered a small supply from the apothecary in Diagon Alley and discreetly administered it in pumpkin juice. The backlash was immediate. One student, Elspeth Greenwell, vomited from the tension-induced nausea. Another began sobbing uncontrollably after 10 minutes of fighting his own face. "I'd rather be hexed than sit through that again," Elspeth later told the Daily Prophet in an exposé on potion misuse in education. Ironically, one of the only written defenses of the draft comes from a place of misguided praise. In his notoriously unreadable 1984 essay, Discipline of the Magical Mind, Basil Hornflax suggested that the denial of basic reflex can elevate a wizard's control of his own nervous system, opening doors to higher magical awareness. He claimed to have consumed the draft every morning for a month. What he didn't publish was the testimony of his secretary, Maud Pinch, who later revealed he suffered nightly jaw dislocations and was banned from 3 flu destinations for screaming mid-transit due to facial cramps. There was one case in which the potion almost served a useful purpose, though even that descended into chaos. During the 1994 Quidditch World Cup, an over-eager reporter from Witch Weekly, Gilda Smarm, took the draft to prevent herself from yawning through the Bulgarian team's dull preliminary match. Instead of improving her focus, she spent 3 hours blinking furiously and clenching her fists as her body battled the instinct to yawn in the cold. Her resulting article, "Why I Hated Every Second of That Game," led to public outcry and nearly cost her her career. Gilda later stated, "I drank it to seem alert. Instead, I looked possessed." Hogwarts officially banned the potion from all classrooms in 1997 after several complaints from parents, including one particularly angry howler sent by Neville Longbottom's grandmother Augusta. She declared, "If my grandson's education includes magical masochism, then I'll withdraw him myself and teach him herbology in our backyard." That year, Professor Flitwick is rumoured to have poured the entire remaining stock into the greenhouse compost. "Let the mandrakes yawn," he muttered, according to an unnamed source. The core absurdity of the potion lies not only in its side effects but in its premise. The yawning reflex is tied not just to sleep, but to brain temperature regulation and even social bonding. By attempting to eliminate it, the potion doesn't enhance alertness. It undermines basic cognitive function. Students under its effects often reported confusion, anxiety, and in rare cases, phantom yawns, a bizarre phenomenon where the mind feels a yawn that never physically occurs. There's also a certain cruelty in its origin. Imagine the logic: to suppress a natural human behavior, not because it causes harm, but because it offends the dignity of a ghost professor who, by all accounts, never notices his students anyway. Even Hermione Granger, known for her discipline, once yawned in Binz's class and received no reaction. "He didn't even look up," she said afterward. "Honestly, he might not even remember his teaching." Fred and George Weasley once got their hands on a small vial of the draught during their 4th year. Naturally, they used it on themselves during History of Magic, just to see what would happen. According to their later retelling at a Gryffindor party, the results were so unbearable that they began scribbling increasingly elaborate sketches of yawning dragons in their textbooks just to distract themselves. By the end of class, their cheeks were twitching, and George muttered, "That's the last time we ever trust anything that smells like boiled ink and fear." To understand how such a potion survived for over a century, one must look at the culture of magical academia. There's a long-standing obsession with discipline, especially among older generations of wizards who equate physical control with magical ability. The idea that a yawn, an innocent biological reflex, could be seen as rebellion says more about the educators than the students. In truth, the potion became a symbol, not of innovation but of control taken too far. Even Severus Snape, a professor not known for his patience or mercy, never once mentioned or employed the reversal yawn draught. It's not because he didn't know of it, he certainly did, but perhaps even he understood the difference between discipline and cruelty. As harsh as Snape could be, he demanded focus, not physical denial. To him, potion-making was an art, not a punishment. There is a story, unconfirmed but widely believed, of him destroying a vial left behind by a predecessor with a single, silent incantation. In today's world, the reversal yawn draught is nearly forgotten. Most apothecaries don't stock it. Potions textbooks like Advanced Potion Making list it only in the appendix, with a warning, for study only, not recommended for practical use. And yet, every now and then, a bottle turns up in a curious box at Borgin and Burke's, or in the dusty shelf of an antique shop in Knockturn Alley, like a cursed relic of a time when the magical community mistook stillness for strength. Perhaps the final word on this bizarre potion belongs to Luna Lovegood, who wrote in her 2006 column for The Quibbler, "Yawning is how the soul stretches its wings. Any potion that prevents it must be very confused." While Luna is not typically considered a reliable scientific source, in this case, her poetic phrasing may be the truest summary of all. In the end, the reversal yawn draught stands as a rare example of magical innovation gone awry, not in its effects, which are impressively consistent, but in its intention. It is a solution to a non-problem, a magical overreach into the basic biology of human beings. It doesn't fix anything, it only makes a tired student more tired, more miserable, and oddly, more memorable. What began as an attempt to protect the egos of ghostly professors became a cautionary tale of misplaced priorities in magical education. The potion exists, yes, but like many things in the wizarding world, its presence in history says more about the people who used it than the potion itself. The lesson, perhaps, is not how to resist yawning, but how to let the magical world grow beyond such peculiarities. And so in the quiet halls of Hogwarts, where so many magical achievements have taken root, this potion lingers not in practice, but in memory. It is whispered about in jest, referred to in passing by professors who remember its brief resurgence, and occasionally mentioned by graduates in conversations that begin with, "Do you remember that ridiculous blue thing we had to drink?" One yawnless hour can feel like a lifetime. That is the legacy of the reversal yawn draught, a potion best left on the shelf as a testament to the fine line between magical brilliance and magical absurdity. Number 22, fluorescent elixir. Of all the absurd concoctions found within the shadowy corners of Zonko's joke shop or the more daring shelves of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, few are as bafflingly charming and wildly impractical as the fluorescent elixir. First whispered about in Fred and George Weasley's tongue-in-cheek promotional leaflets, specifically in their experimental elixirs, try at your own risk section. This potion straddles a precarious line between harmless prank and outright liability. After a single swig, the drinker's skin begins to emit a low, phosphorescent glow. The color varies, though pink and green are the most reported hues. The effect lasts for several hours and no known antidote exists, at least not one the twins ever admitted to developing. Lee Jordan once referred to it in jest as the perfect drink for someone who desperately wants to be abducted by Muggle scientists, and indeed the first time it was tested publicly at a Hogsmeade weekend party organised in the back room of the Hog's Head. The room erupted into laughter when Dennis Creevey suddenly turned into what could only be described as a human firefly. That night, every time he laughed or gestured, streaks of neon light painted themselves into the air, but the humour quickly died when the party was raided by Argus Filch. As the fluorescent Dennis fled into the streets, the glow radiating from his skin made him a beacon in the dark. He was caught in under 5 minutes, earning 2 weeks of detention and a lifetime ban from any after-hours student gatherings. The elixir, though clearly effective in its singular function, has invited derision for its complete lack of practicality. The Daily Prophet's Wizarding Fads and Flops column once called it an enthusiastic example of potion-making for potion-making's sake. Its invention seems less like a stroke of magical innovation and more like a dare gone right. The fluorescent elixir serves no medical, defensive, or even particularly comedic purpose, unless one counts temporary embarrassment as a goal, and yet it persists, a staple among the more eccentric potioneering circles who see its sole virtue in its theatricality. Hogwarts' own Horace Slughorn once received a small vial of it from a grateful former student, probably one of the more artistically inclined ones. For his next Slug Club gathering, he added the elixir to the drinks as a joke, expecting nothing more than laughter. But the result was a room full of shimmering young witches and wizards who quickly realized the drawback. When a nosy photographer from Witch Weekly arrived unexpectedly, many of the attendees had to flee, hoping the enchantment would wear off before they were caught glowing in compromising poses. The article that followed described the event as a celestial masquerade, but Slughorn privately vowed never to serve it again. Some, like Luna Lovegood, saw potential in the elixir that others missed. She once painted glowing runes on her arms before attending a Quibbler-sponsored stargazing event near Ottery St. Catchpole. Her radiant skin matched the constellations, and while the scene was ethereal, even she admitted, it makes you a lovely target for mosquitoes. Indeed, in any outdoor setting, the potion is less a novelty and more a liability. Magical creatures, both benign and dangerous, are known to be attracted to sources of unnatural light. There was a brief time when ministry officials toyed with the idea of using the elixir as a tracking mechanism during wizarding duels or field missions. The logic seemed sound. A glowing aura would be easier to locate in the fog of battle, but this was quickly abandoned when a test subject in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement was mistaken for a rogue will-o'-the-wisp by a band of frightened Muggle campers and nearly hexed into oblivion by a trainee with shaky nerves. Arguably, the strangest chapter in the elixir's history occurred during the final year of the Second Wizarding War. With Hogwarts under the control of the Carrows and Snape, students resorted to increasingly desperate tactics to communicate, distract, or defy. It was said that Seamus Finnegan, in a fit of rebellious brilliance, drank the fluorescent elixir and streaked across the courtyard, screaming anti-Carrow slogans, glowing like a beacon of defiance. The moment was short-lived. He was promptly stunned, but his brief luminescence became a legend among the DA survivors. He looked like a Patronus made of rage, Neville Longbottom later recalled. Despite this momentary association with heroism, the elixir has remained largely a punchline. At best, it is a party trick. At worst, a tactical disaster. The very trait that defines it, the glow, renders the user immediately visible to any eye, magical or not. When stealth is required, it is utterly disastrous. Aurors jokingly call it the betrayal brew, a potion guaranteed to give away your position, your intent, and possibly your underwear, if your robes happen to be thin enough. And yet there are still a few niche circles that adore it. Magical performance artists, particularly those who stage nighttime exhibitions, have embraced it. In the recent moonlit festival of wand arts in northern Wales, a trio of performers known as the Luminara Sisters performed a synchronized wand dance while their skin pulsed with shifting colors. The visual impact was stunning, part aurora borealis, part Cirque du Soleil, but even they admitted that it took 3 days to fully wear off. Sleeping was strange, one of them confessed. My face kept lighting up the pillow. Even among pranksters, the elixir is not universally loved. George Weasley, the only surviving twin, eventually pulled it from the main shelves at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, relegating it to the discontinued but dangerous section. People think it's fun until they realize it doesn't come off, he said in an interview. I had a bloke who tried to scrub it off with sandpaper. Came back with glowing elbows and a lawsuit. The potion's creation remains a mystery, though it's widely assumed the twins had help, possibly from an unnamed Hogwarts potion prodigy, or perhaps even an older student with a flair for the theatrical. A student named Rupert Bleakley claimed to have invented it during his time in Slytherin, mixing moonstone dust with a diluted Spectre-Specs enchantment and a whisper of Lumos-infused essence. His recipe was never confirmed, but the accidental glowing of his familiar, a stoat named Crispin, gained him a reputation he never quite shook off. Despite its ludicrous nature, the elixir endures as a relic of magical adolescence. Like love potions or hiccup sweets, it is less about function and more about feeling, specifically the feeling of being young, bold, and just foolish enough to want to glow in the dark. One might even argue that its uselessness is the point. In a world increasingly defined by utility and precision, a potion with no purpose but joy becomes a quiet form of rebellion. Still, there have been misuses. A group of first years once poured it into the Slytherin prefect's pumpkin juice as revenge for a week of bullying. The effect was instantaneous and outrageous, a glowing, furious prefect storming the halls like a radioactive banshee. The pranksters were caught, of course, mostly because they too had drunk the elixir in solidarity, creating a chain of easily traceable neon footprints. Madame Pomfrey, always stern about irresponsible ingestion, has kept a small vial of the elixir locked in her restricted potion cabinet as an example of non-therapeutic alchemy. Once, when asked by a student why she didn't simply vanish it, she replied, "Because sometimes it's better to remind future healers what not to spend their talents on." Interestingly, no record exists of Dumbledore ever commenting on the potion directly, but in one of his collected letters to Elphias Doge, he did muse, "There is great beauty in light that serves no purpose but to dance." Scholars believe this may be an oblique reference to the fluorescent elixir, which had already started making its rounds among the students by the late 1980s. In the end, the potion exists not because it is needed, but because it can exist. Magic, after all, is not merely a tool but an expression, and for all its lack of rational application, the fluorescent elixir has a place in that spectrum. It may not save lives, fix bones, or win duels, but it leaves behind laughter, stories, and a faint glow on the skin of memory. It is a potion that burns brightly for no reason, which may be the most magical thing of all. Number 23. Accent infusion. In the cluttered back corner of Professor Slughorn's storage cupboard, hidden behind jars of pickled newt-eyes and powdered bicorn horn, sat a dusty vial labelled in faded ink, "Elixir of Pronounced Accentuation." The label was crooked, the cork slightly discoloured. It was one of those concoctions that most students assumed was either a failed experiment or a prank by Fred and George Weasley in their younger, more mischievous years. But this potion, known among a niche circle of experimental potion brewers as accentuation draught, or less formally, zing of the tongue, was in fact entirely real, and almost entirely useless. The potion had been referenced only once in the classroom, and that was when Horace Slughorn had chuckled through a memory during a NEWT-level potions lesson. "A curious little brew," he had said, swirling a glass of elderflower wine after class. Back in the 1930s, a Durmstrang dropout swore by it for his stage career, claimed it made him sound more like a Parisian opera singer, He ended up reciting Shakespeare in a Romanian brogue so thick no one could understand Hamlet's grief. The students had laughed, but Slughorn's chuckle held a note of genuine bafflement. Why, in a world of complex charms and polyjuice potions, would anyone brew a draught that simply gave them a temporary accent? One would think such a potion would have a clear use in espionage or diplomacy. Perhaps during the height of the First Wizarding War, it might have had some clandestine value. Imagine an agent slipping into a foreign ministry pretending to be one of their own. Yet the magical world had more elegant tools for deception. A disillusionment charm could render one nearly invisible. The imperious curse, though unforgivable, could compel truths from the highest of ministers. Even the common voice-changing charm found in most fourth-year textbooks rendered the accentuation draught moot. It wasn't simply impractical, it was laughable. The most infamous example of the potion's misuse came during the 2010 Hogwarts elective seminar on obscure elixirs and arcane infusions, an advanced potioneering course introduced under the renewed tenure of Professor Astoria Greengrass. The course attracted an unusual mix of students, those with genuine passion and those simply looking for something to pad out their curriculum vitae. Among the latter was Gideon Rosier, a flamboyant Slytherin in his 6th year, whose ancestral pride and theatrical flair were often mistaken for arrogance. Gideon fancied himself a romantic hero in the mould of Gilderoy Lockhart, though with considerably less substance behind his dramatics. When Beauxbatons Academy sent a small delegation of students for a cultural exchange, Gideon spotted an opportunity. Among the group was Élise Montparnasse, a Vila-descended witch with celestial poise and a laugh that sent boys stumbling over their robes. Gideon was smitten. Convinced that a French accent would elevate his charm, he secretly pocketed a vial of the accentuation draught from the storage cupboard after a seminar demonstration. "Just a sip," he later claimed. "Just enough to sound like I was born in Marseille." Unfortunately for Gideon, the variant he consumed was known for producing an exaggerated Irish brogue. What was meant to be a suave compliment emerged as a garbled string of nasal consonants and lisping vowels. "Ye've the spark of starlight in your, no, I mean your aura's like, blah, never mind," he had sputtered. Students erupted in laughter. Elise blinked politely, then drifted away, clearly unimpressed. For the next 2 hours, Gideon couldn't properly pronounce the word charisma without sounding like he had a mouthful of marbles. It wasn't just a matter of embarrassment. The potion had side effects that were far more disruptive than expected, because it altered not only the pronunciation, but also the speech rhythm and intonation. Students who ingested it found themselves physically struggling to produce coherent sentences. In one case, a Hufflepuff prefect named Marianne Bell had tried the Eastern European variant and was rendered mute for an entire weekend, unable to speak without rolling her R's so forcefully that it triggered a hiccuping curse buried in one of the castle's older wards. Even Peeves found the potion ridiculous. After managing to swipe a sample from the dungeons, he floated through the Great Hall, shouting limericks in a French accent so absurdly stylized it sounded like a parody. "Oh la la, the toast, it is on fire, it burns like le sun in the trousers of the librarian." Professor McGonagall, never one to tolerate nonsense, temporarily banished him from the upper floors for disrupting breakfast with linguistic chaos. Some theorists have attempted to defend the potion's creation. "In early theatrical circles," wrote Barnaby Twill in Theatrical Transfigurations, "magic on the stage, accent potions were viewed as an alternative to memory-intensive acting. It allowed even the most inept performer to embody a character for a few hours." But even Barnaby admitted the idea fell flat when actors found themselves unable to switch accents or control how exaggerated they became. In one production of The Tragedy of Lady Maud, a potion-brewed Scottish dialect was so strong the audience believed it was a performance about dragons in the Highlands, when in fact it was set in Devonshire. Some even speculate that the potion was originally created as a prank. A 17th-century brewer named Claudius Monch, known for mixing potions with deliberately inconvenient side effects, is sometimes credited with its invention. Munch also created the infamous sneezing syrup of Somerset, which caused the drinker to sneeze every time they attempted to lie. His notebooks contained a crude draft of an accent potion titled Zing Du Long, annotated with the phrase, "For the pompous and proud, let them stumble on their own voice." If true, the potion was never meant to aid communication. It was meant to humble. At St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, the potion occasionally makes an appearance, though always as the cause of a patient's condition, never the cure. In 2023, a minor incident involving a Ravenclaw graduate and a poorly brewed variant of the draft left him locked in a loop, switching accents every 30 seconds. He greeted me in Russian and said goodbye in Brazilian Portuguese, reported the attending healer, who requested anonymity. We finally had to use a memory charm just to stop his brain from trying to conjugate verbs it didn't understand. None of the standard antidotes seemed to fully reverse the effect. Unlike a polyjuice potion or a standard voice charm, the accentuation draft worked on a neurological level, briefly reshaping the drinker's speech centers. It was as though the potion temporarily taught the brain how to sound foreign, but without any of the actual comprehension, a hollow mimicry, an echo, without understanding. Perhaps the potion's most damning quality is its complete lack of control. One cannot choose which accent they'll receive. Brewed improperly, the potion has been known to jumble linguistic traits entirely, resulting in amalgams that no culture would recognize. One student at Ilvermorny described their experience after taking the draft as sounding like a Welsh pirate who studied abroad in Cairo. It was meant to be a harmless prank before a Halloween party. It ended with them reciting spell incantations backward and nearly igniting a tapestry. Some potions are poetic in their purpose, noted Professor Severus Snape in his first-year lectures. Distilled philosophy. Others are violent science, but a select few are neither. They are jokes told in bad taste. While Snape never officially taught the accentuation draft, his disdain for novelty brews was well known. It's difficult not to imagine his sneer if he'd encountered this one, a potion with no mastery, no grace, and no utility. Still, every few years, the potion re-emerges like a ghost that refuses to stay buried. A curious student brews it for fun, or a rogue potioneer includes it in a compendium for eccentric spellcasters. In 2021, the joke periodical The Daily Draft included a recipe for it under the section Potions for Polite Party Tricksters, next to the infamous bubblegum bark elixir and glow-in-the-dark goblet grease. Even among such silliness, the accentuation draft stood out for its pure irrelevance. And yet, despite its flaws, perhaps because of them, it retains a peculiar charm. In an age where magical efficiency reigns, where every spell is measured and optimized, a potion that does nothing of value reminds us that magic, too, can be whimsical. It can be stupid. It can exist for no better reason than to make a room full of teenagers laugh when their friend tries to recite Alohomora with the poise of a drunken leprechaun. For a moment, that laughter is magic, not the kind found in duels or dungeons or ancient spells etched into stone, but in the simple, unpredictable and useless power of sounding ridiculous on purpose. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Even if your accent makes a gargoyle wince. Number 24. Ragdoll Potion. The potion was a curiosity buried deep within the tattered pages of Mosta Potenta Potions, found wedged between entries of far greater menace and mystery. Known as the ragging draft, or more colloquially as the rag potion, it earned its name not through any flashy effects or dark curses, but for the humiliating limpness it brought to those foolish enough to ingest it. Descriptions noted that the limbs of the drinker would become flaccid and nearly unusable, rendering movement slow, clumsy, and utterly ineffective. The effect lasted a full hour. To the untrained eye, the potion seemed like a cruel prank at best. To a seasoned potioneer, it was simply pointless. Horace Slughorn, in his post-retirement lectures given to a group of ministry-affiliated potion regulators, once brought up the rag potion with what can only be described as an amused grimace. "It's the one concoction I regret teaching," he admitted, twirling his moustache. "Not because it's dangerous, oh no, but because it's utterly miserable. You'd get more utility out of a hiccuping draft. At least that inspires laughter." Indeed, the potion had no real place in dueling, defense, healing, or even mischief. It was neither fatal nor funny, just dreadfully uncomfortable. The symptoms began subtly. First a heaviness in the arms, as if gravity had doubled its efforts. Then came the dull ache in the legs, like someone had replaced your bones with wet noodles. The knees lost their will. Feet refused to respond with precision. Even the drinker's voice would slur, not from any mental effect, but simply because their jaw no longer had the strength to enunciate clearly. The afflicted would shuffle, trip, and slump like an old scarecrow during a thunderstorm. As one St. Mungo's trainee described after volunteering for a test dosage, it felt like my body was trying to become soup inside my own skin. The potion's history is obscure but not altogether blank. According to surviving manuscripts from the late 17th century, it may have been developed during a brief surge in experimental alchemy when ministry officials sought to understand the mechanics of muscle control. A particular name crops up: Bertram Smoot, a minor academic from the Institute of Experimental Potioneering, known more for his disastrous farting fumes elixir than any real breakthrough. Smoot reportedly created the rag potion while attempting to isolate nerves responsible for fine motor control in wizards under duress. The results were promising in the scientific sense, he scribbled in his notes, though practically the test subject resembled a deflated dirigible. Why such a potion survived beyond the experimentation phase remains a mystery. It has no offensive capabilities in a duel. An opponent would need to be tricked into drinking it beforehand, which is highly impractical. It does not aid healing, since muscle weakness is rarely therapeutic. Even as punishment, it is inefficient and potentially illegal. Dolores Umbridge reportedly considered using it during her brief reign at Hogwarts, but was advised against it due to its proximity to cruel and unusual punishment. Her response, noted in a seized memo, was, "Too mild. I prefer methods with lasting impressions." When Gilderoy Lockhart was clearing out the Hogwarts potion storeroom during one of his less glamorous appointments, he famously came across a vial labelled liquefatio corpus. Mistaking it for a moisturizing serum, he applied a drop to his tongue. What followed was a brief but theatrical collapse in the staff room, much to the horror of Minerva McGonagall, who thought he was suffering a stroke. His arms folded like cooked asparagus, she later told Poppy Pomfrey, and he flopped about like a fish out of water. I feared he had finally forgotten how to walk. It took nearly an hour for him to regain control of his limbs, during which he moaned incomprehensible declarations of heroism. There is one curious footnote in which the rag potion was used in earnest, the case of Cressida Fling, a misanthropic witch living in Knockturn Alley, who used it to stage her own kidnapping. Tired of her nosy family visiting uninvited, she downed the potion, flung herself across the floor of her home like a discarded rag doll, and scrawled a fake ransom note in her wobbling handwriting. "They'll leave me alone for weeks," she reportedly whispered to a friend later. Unfortunately for her, a neighbour's pet Kneasel ate the note, and Aura's stormed her apartment days later. Cressida was fined for wasting ministry resources. Even the most prank-prone students at Hogwarts rarely reached for the rag potion. The Weasley twins, known for their ingenuity in embarrassment-based spells, experimented with a variation called Sloppy Limb Surprise, but ultimately shelved it. "It's no fun if the victim can't run around," George Weasley once said. "And it's just depressing, really. No laughter, just a puddle of person moaning on the floor. Makes you feel guilty. That's not our brand." Professor Snape kept a vial of the potion locked in a high cupboard, not for practical use, but as a lesson in futility. During his third-year potions lecture on the value of intention in alchemical reactions, he would hold it up and state, "This is what happens when you brew without purpose, a waste of effort and resources, the potion equivalent of wet socks." His disdain was clear. Snape, who had devoted his life to precision and effectiveness, saw the rag potion as an insult to the craft. The side effects linger far beyond the hour of active symptoms. Drinkers often report residual aches and tremors, similar to what one might feel after a grueling Quidditch match or a fall from a broomstick. The sensation of being wrung out like a wet dishcloth, as multiple testimonies describe it, can last days. One ministry intern, Felix Witter, who took the potion during a botched research experiment, filed a complaint stating he felt like his skeleton had been replaced by slugs. And yet, the potion remains in textbooks. Why? Some argue it exists as a cautionary tale, an example of what not to pursue in magical development. Others, like potion scholar Daria Kleist, believe it's a reminder that not all magic is meant to be useful. Magic reflects the human condition, she once wrote. Sometimes it creates beauty, sometimes power, and sometimes, quite absurdly, it creates discomfort. The rag potion reminds us that not everything can be tamed or made beneficial. Some things exist just to be endured. A handful of fringe artists in the wizarding world have adopted the potion for performance art. At a bizarre magical exhibition in Dublin titled The Fragility of Movement, performers took measured doses and attempted to dance on stage while under the influence of the potion. The result was a haunting, slow-motion ballet of flailing limbs and whispered sighs. Critics called it grotesque and involuntary expressionism. The show was shut down after one dancer dislocated her shoulder trying to pirouette with a limp torso. Potion regulators at the Department of Magical Substances have labelled the rag potion as low risk, low utility, a classification reserved for concoctions like the forget-me soup, which erases recent memories but smells like burned cabbage, and the colour burp elixir, which makes the drinker burp random colours for 20 minutes. In their internal review, the department concluded, not harmful, not helpful, not recommended. The potion's continued appearance in apothecaries is largely due to tradition and morbid curiosity. Borgin & Burke's carries a single bottle, nestled beside a shriveled hand and a cursed music box. When asked about it, the shopkeeper shrugged. "Collectors like it," he said. "Makes them feel edgy, I suppose. It's rare, not because it's dangerous, but because no one bothers to make it anymore, like collecting a defective wand. Even among dark wizards, the potion finds no fans." Barty Crouch Jr., during his confession under Veritaserum, scoffed when shown a vial recovered from his hiding place. "That, please, that's not a weapon. That's what you give to a crook with a leg injury, not a target. My father wouldn't have dignified it with a second glance." Indeed, the potion's sheer uselessness renders it invisible to those who trade in real terror. The only documented magical creature affected by the rag potion was a lethargic house elf named Crimsy, who accidentally consumed it while cleaning the potion's classroom at Beaubaton. Crimsy spent the next hour collapsing in slow motion across various benches, eventually sliding into a cauldron and requiring rescue. Afterward, she refused to go near potions ever again and took up embroidery instead. In the end, the rag potion serves a strange purpose. It is a benchmark of absurdity. Among students, it's a whispered joke, the answer to quiz questions meant to trip up over-eager first years. Which potion causes loss of all practical dignity without any real benefit? The professor would ask, and the classroom would chorus, "The rag potion!" It's the punchline in a curriculum that takes itself very seriously, yet despite its flaws, despite its pointlessness, the potion persists. Like a misplaced sock in the world's great drawer of magic, it lingers, not revered, not respected, but remembered. Because sometimes, even in the world of potions, something utterly useless can still leave an impression, especially when it makes you crawl across the floor like a sack of laundry. Number 25, Flavor Reversal Draft. At the far end of the restricted section in the Hogwarts library, behind a shelf draped in dust and shadow, there exists a volume so forgotten even Madame Pince once called it a culinary curse, disguised as an academic footnote. The page in question lies midway through Uncommon Elixirs and Experiments, from galleon-worthy to garbage bin, authored by eccentric potioneer Bertramus Pritlock in 1787. Nestled between an entry on a brew that makes your voice echo 3 seconds after speaking and one that turns burps into bubbles, there it sits, the Flavor Flipper Draft. An unassuming potion that, when swallowed, reverses all sensory taste experiences. Sweet becomes bitter, sour becomes sickeningly sugary, and savoury dishes fall to tasteless mush. At first glance it might seem harmless, comical even. But the legacy of this concoction is far more ruinous than its whimsical description suggests. The potion was supposedly invented as an exercise in discipline, a way for aspiring potioneers to train their senses, resist cravings, and develop intellectual independence from bodily delights, as Pritlock wrote. But from the very first test subject of an unfortunate student named Ada Greenbridge of Ravenclaw, the results proved catastrophic. Greenbridge recorded in her journal that the moment the potion took effect, her pumpkin pasty turned into a chalky slab of bitterness, and her glass of pumpkin juice felt like gargling a rusty cauldron. She didn't finish her lunch that day, or her dinner. In fact, she confessed to sneaking into the Forbidden Forest at dusk just to chew on raw spruce bark, desperate for something that didn't taste wrong. Even water, pure and otherwise refreshing, becomes unbearable under the influence of the flavor flipper. This is the potion's most alarming trait. As it turns out, the brew affects not just taste buds, but the very way one's brain processes flavor and texture. The change is total, involuntary, and persistent, a cruel spell cast upon the fundamental joy of eating. For students at Hogwarts, where feasts are legendary and meals are among the few certainties in a chaotic, magical life, the potion is nothing short of sabotage. Headmaster Armando Dippet once likened it to removing colour from the walls of the Great Hall, though some students argued it was worse. At least colour doesn't keep you alive. When the potion surfaced again in the 1940s, it was during a short-lived curriculum experiment in Professor Everard Mistwillow's Advanced Alchemical Ethics course. Mistwillow, known for his fascination with abstract magical concepts, believed the potion would foster resilience and help students overcome the tyranny of appetite. It did nothing of the sort. During the trial week, 3 students fainted from dehydration, 5 reported mood disturbances, and a Hufflepuff 4th year bit his own hand during a hunger-induced tantrum. "I could feel the mashed potatoes trying to lie to me," he reportedly shouted before being escorted to the hospital wing. Albus Dumbledore, at the time merely a professor of transfiguration, offered a rare piece of criticism in writing. In a letter to the Board of Governors, he penned, "One might argue that the cultivation of character requires occasional discomfort, but no lesson in nobility should come at the cost of a student gnawing at a wooden chair for sustenance." Dumbledore's quiet wit concealed a deeper concern, that in toying with basic sensory functions, the potion threatened the boundary between intellectual curiosity and magical irresponsibility. This wasn't academic experimentation, it was culinary punishment. The very mechanics of the potion are cruelly elegant. Its key ingredients include crushed fluxweed, which amplifies bodily perception, fermented billywig stings, known for disrupting nerve signals, and a drop of essence of bog myrtle, an herb infamous for its bitterness. Once brewed correctly, the potion emits no odor, no color, and only the faintest flicker of heat. It is undetectable in pumpkin juice and virtually indistinguishable from water. Its effects set in within 15 seconds and last between 6 to 9 hours. And unlike the Polyjuice potion or Felix Felicis, there is no known antidote. The only known countermeasure is to wait it out, often with increasing frustration. Students who have dared to sample the flavor flipper, whether by accident or as part of a dare, frequently recount a descent into irrational fury. Molly Prewett, long before she married Arthur Weasley, tried a sip in her 5th year. According to her friend Marlene McKinnon's account, in the Gryffindor Scrolls, Molly overturned an entire table in the common room after discovering that even her favourite treacle tart now tasted like burnt nails. "It's like someone cursed happiness itself," she later wrote in a confiscated note passed to Fabian. There is a tragic poetry to the potion's futility. No one consumes it for joy, enlightenment, or utility. It offers no healing, no enhancement, no thrill. It is not illegal, yet it is universally avoided. Even Fred and George Weasley, whose threshold for prank-based mischief remains unmatched, once attempted to recreate the brew for a line of novelty sweets. They abandoned the experiment after one of their taste testers, a garden gnome named Snubs, refused to eat for 2 days and bit off part of a butterbeer barrel in frustration. The real danger lies in how subtle the potion's sabotage is. It doesn't cause physical harm, it doesn't knock you unconscious or make your nose fall off. Instead, It removes one of the most ancient human pleasures, taste, and replaces it with a betrayal of expectation. A steak becomes sawdust, a lemon tart becomes molten syrup, a cup of warm cocoa tastes like chewed-up parchment. The sensation is not just jarring, it's disorienting. Meals become acts of dread, not comfort. Once, during the Tri-Wizard tournament preparations, an over-enthusiastic Beauxbatons student named Thérèse Duffont mistook a sample of the flavor flipper for infused cordial and drank it moments before the welcome feast. According to Fleur Delacour's personal memoirs, Duffont sat at the long table surrounded by roast duck, caramelized apples, and fine cheeses, all of which turned to the memory of soap and spoonfuls of seaweed in her mouth. She wept quietly, and later wrote home describing Hogwarts as a castle of cruelty disguised by golden plates. The psychological consequences of this potion are equally grim. More than a dozen students over centuries of sporadic encounters with the flavor flipper have reported symptoms of phantom bitterness, a condition where foods continue to taste wrong long after the potion wears off. This phenomenon, studied by the late mind healer Abigail Horncroft, revealed that taste memories could be so corrupted by the potion that future experiences with formerly beloved meals would be tainted. Horncroft called it sensorial trauma. In a study conducted at St. Mungo's, she observed one case in which a wizard could no longer tolerate chocolate frogs after a single exposure to the potion. The chocolate, once delightful, now carried the taste of ashes soaked in vinegar. Perhaps the most famous casualty of the potion's curse was Gilderoy Lockhart himself. In his third year, Lockhart brewed the potion by mistake while attempting to create a so-called delightful dessert enhancer to impress a visiting delegation from the Magical Culinary Institute of Naples. According to a letter uncovered from his confiscated notebooks, he drank it, then spent the next 8 hours describing his misery to anyone within earshot. He later claimed it had been a test of the will and tried to publish a chapter titled Triumph Over Taste in one of his ghostwritten books. The chapter was cut. Ironically, the potion's only successful deployment came in the 19th century when a group of Ravenclaws used it to sabotage a Slytherin feast during a house cup celebration. Slipping it into the Slytherin punch bowl, they watched gleefully as their rivals spat out what they thought was poisoned treacle. The prank backfired when 2 Slytherins developed long-term food aversion. The perpetrators were punished not with detentions but with a week of mandatory ingestion of their own brew. Justice in this case was poetic and painful. Despite its infamy, the flavor flipper continues to appear in some Hogwarts textbooks as a cautionary tale. Professor Slughorn, in one of his less indulgent moments, once told his class, "Brewing is not always about brilliance. Sometimes it is restraint that makes a true potioneer." He gestured to a drawing of the potion on the blackboard, a simple vial with a question mark above it. "Because what is genius," he said, "if it cannot taste the pudding it creates?" There is no real reason to drink the flavor flipper. It doesn't teach discipline. It doesn't build character. It doesn't broaden your magical horizons. It isolates you from the world's warmth, from the community of shared meals and celebratory toasts. And perhaps worst of all, it introduces doubt where there should be none. The next bite, the next sip, becomes an act of fear. Its only legacy is discomfort, and yet, like so many useless magical curiosities, it persists, a stain on the history of potion-making, a ghost in the kitchen of Hogwarts. There's a bottle of it still locked in the potion storeroom behind a cabinet marked, "Do not touch." Not because it's dangerous in the usual way, but because it reminds us that magic, for all its wonders, can be the thief of joy. In the end, the flavor flipper stands as a grim monument to magical excess. A potion that answers no question, solves no problem, and offers no delight. Its only gift is misery, and for that it remains perhaps the most useless elixir ever brewed within the hallowed walls of Hogwarts.